following program is exclusively produced and distributed by Dick Dinman's Double D Productions, Inc., all rights reserved.
Hi, Golden Age film fanatics, and welcome to DVD Classics Corner on the Air. My name is Dick Dinman, and our goal is to become your exclusive guide to the very best of the Golden Age classics coming out on DVD. We'll have reviews, breaking news of upcoming releases, plenty of surprise guests, and a special feature devoted to the great Golden Age film composers, which we call Cinemusic. So let's turn on the marquee and lights, camera, action.
It's time for Dick's Picks, in which I get to shine the spotlight on one of my Dick's Picks of the week. Hi, this is Dick Dinman, and this will be the first of two shows devoted to the brilliant director and co-writer of some of the world's most iconic films, including Double Indemnity, Sunset Boulevard, Some Like It Hot, and The Apartment. Of course, I'm talking about none other than Billy Wilder, whose films, to quote the American Film Institute, have stood the test of time and then some. In the course of our next two shows, my guest Joseph McBRIDE and I will compare notes on all of the Billy Wilder classics that this once-in-a-lifetime mega-talent has both directed and co-written. Stay tuned for more Dick's Picks, coming up on DVD Classics Corner on the Air very soon. My distinguished guest today is the internationally acclaimed author and film historian, Joseph McBRIDE, the author of 22 books, including biographies of Frank Capra, Steven Spielberg, John Ford, Howard Hawks, and Orson Welles. His latest literary triumph is a masterful critical study of the films of Billy Wilder, which is titled Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge, which is available from Columbia University Press. Incidentally, many of the Billy Wilder films that Joseph and I discussed during the course of our show are available on Blu-ray, courtesy of Kino Lorber, Home Entertainment. Joseph McBRIDE, welcome back to DVD Classics Corner on the Air on a very, very special event because we're saluting your wonderful new book, which is available through Columbia University Press, entitled Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge. Your book is definitely, I think, the finest critical study of all of his films that I have read to date. It's a marvelous book. And during the course of this show, we'll attempt to cover, some briefly, some not so briefly, the films that he co-wrote and directed. And so we start with his first directorial effort in America, The Major and the Minor. And this is a very charming, nice film, nice comedy film with two big stars, Ginger Rogers and Ray Milland. But I believe that he calculated, he and his partner calculated exactly what would be a big box office success to start his career. I think, and tell me if you disagree, I think that he blunted his instincts to a certain degree to make sure that this was as audience-friendly a film as is possible. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, he consciously did that. He wanted to make a film because he said, the studio kind of thought, okay, we'll let this guy direct a film, and then maybe it'll flop, and he can come back and be a writer. And but he didn't want to do that, and so when Hold Back the Dawn was directed by Mitchell Leisen, it's a very good film, but Leisen and Charles Boyer, the star, changed cut one scene that Wilder really cared about, in which Boyer, who's trying to get into America, is a Romanian gigolo languishing in a hotel in Mexico, sees a cockroach and he compares himself to the cockroach, and they cut that out, and Wilder was outraged. The film meant a lot to him because it was very personal, very autobiographical.
Right.
So he thought he would make a very entertaining light comedy. But, you know, the interesting thing about Major and the Minor is when you look at it today, it's quite obvious. The underlying subtext is about pedophilia,
Yeah.
which is a very daring subject in 1942 and even today, of course. It's Lolita way ahead of its time because Ginger Rogers is impersonating a 12-year-old girl, and part of the comedy of the film is that, you know, it's so obvious she's not 12 years old, but everybody in the film is fooled by her except for a teenage girl. Diana Lynn is wonderful in the film.
Right.
And all the adults are idiots because they don't see through the disguise. And Ray Milland falls in love with her, which is the pedophilia aspect, but she's playing along with it, but she's attracted to him, and then they wind up, you know, he realizes at the very end she's actually a woman. But he's playing with that dynamite theme and doing it in quite a witty way.
And the movie was a major hit. Now, his second film I find fascinating. I happen to very much like his second film for Paramount, Five Graves to Cairo.
Yeah, good film.
And it's a really good film, and I'm a movie music buff, and it's the first time he had Miklos Rosa score the film, which aids it immeasurably. Now, I like the film very much, but I had heard, and maybe you can clarify this, I heard that for some reason Billy Wilder did not like the star of the film, Franchot Tone. Do you have any information as to why? Because he's wonderful in it.
Yeah, he's very good. I don't think he's wild about him, but I mean, for one thing, he's an American actor. He played an Englishman. He doesn't even attempt a British accent, which in Hollywood in those days was not uncommon. But he's fine in the film. Wilder was not even terribly fond of Ray Milland, even though he directed.
You're joking. Really?
Yeah, he thought he was not as good an actor as people thought. He won an Oscar for Last Weekend, but he was also, Wilder felt that Milland was somewhat anti-Semitic, and
really?
he wasn't a big fan of his. But Five Graves to Cairo, you mentioned the Blu-rays, and it is wonderful that of Wilder's 25 American films as a director, they're all available on DVD or Blu-ray, except, I believe, Buddy Buddy, which was his last film.
Yeah.
That came out on
well, I'm talking about Blu-ray, and Spirit of St. Louis is not available as yet on Blu-ray. By the way, I forgot to mention to my audience, Major and the Minor is available from Arrow Academy, and Five Graves to Cairo is Kino Lorber, who is releasing it. I love the film. I just think it's a beautifully done film, and I would assume you sort of agree with me.
Yeah, I did the Blu-ray audio commentary, actually, for Kino Lorber, and I've done the commentary on two films that are coming out shortly, Some Like It Hot and The Apartment.
I seem to have heard of those films.
Yeah, two of his greatest films, but there are new editions coming up.
Right.
Well, one of the things about Wilder was he really wanted to be versatile, and again, it was a smart career move. He didn't want to be typed as a director of only one kind of film, so after making a romantic comedy to start with, he does a war movie, and of course, almost every director was doing a war movie at the time, although, we tend to think that they're all watching war movies back in the 40s, but in fact, the movies that were mostly made were comedies and musicals and things like that, escapism. But Wilder was making his contribution to the war effort, and it's a little propagandistic, especially at the end, but it's a very suspenseful drama, And Erich von Stroheim is in it, who was one of Wilder's directorial idols, along with Ernst Lubitsch.
Yeah.
And it's a very taut and witty melodrama about the war, and very well done.
Let's go to the next film, which is available from Universal Home Video, which is, of course, Double Indemnity.
Yeah.
Well, look, what can we say? This film is a masterpiece from first frame to last. I can watch this film once a week for the rest of my life and never get tired of it. That's how much I adore this film. I'm assuming you agree with me.
Yeah, it's one of his best. And Woody Allen, I quoted various current directors at the end of the book, and some older directors, about how much they admire Wilder. And Woody Allen is on record saying he thought that was about the best American film he ever saw, and maybe the best film he ever saw. And it's just a perfect film, and it started the whole film noir genre. Even though there were, some noirish films before that, and that word was not coined until the 50s. That term, but it's a corrosive drama, and it's one of those films that you wonder how they got away with it in Hollywood, because it's two people having illicit sex, and then they kill the husband of the woman, and then they kill each other. It's very dark, and part of it is you could get away with things more if the film was based on a well-known novel, and in this case, James M. Cain wrote a tremendous novel. But they improved on it a lot, and Wilder wrote the script with Raymond Chandler. It's a great screenplay.
Yeah.
Chandler and Wilder famously had a contentious relationship. Chandler complained that Wilder was taking phone calls from women and being sarcastic, and while they were working and waving.
Yeah.
He kept walking around when he worked. He was very restless, and he'd wave a stick or a swagger stick or something, and Chandler was driven crazy by his personality.
And part of the magic of this film is the casting. Barbara Stanwyck initially turned it down, I believe, because it was the darkest role she ever played. And I think I'm quoting Billy Wilder when he finally said to her, "Are you an actress or a mouse?"
Right, she was such a great actress, and she was very gutsy. Even she was thrown by Double Indemnity, and Wilder, as you say, had to put her on the spot, and of course she responded positively.
I do feel, though, that the one only problem I have with Double Indemnity is Wilder giving her a blonde wig. I feel this is totally unnecessary. Do you agree?
I think that's okay. It fits the image of this kind of strange woman who's playing a game. And Wilder's characters are often role-playing and acting in disguises, and that kind of fits for me.
And the other brilliant stroke, it's a real stroke of luck in casting. Fred MacMurray is absolutely brilliant in Double Indemnity.
Well, he is just such wonderful casting.
Double Indemnity is a masterpiece, and it couldn't be more highly recommended by both of us. And as I say, it's available from Universal Home Entertainment. Okay, next comes The Lost Weekend. Now, and this is available, by the way, from Kino Lorber Home Entertainment. I can't put my finger on why I cannot get involved in the film. There's certain scenes with Frank Phelan and Howard Da Silva that I like immensely, but there's something to me that's just a little bit off in this film. Can you?
Well, I know what you mean, Dick. I did the commentary on that one, too, and I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I talked about that, frankly, in the commentary, which I think makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Because I know the subject, and I have trouble with that film, too. The novel I read when I did the commentary and read it before, and it's extremely painful to read. It's good, but it's horribly agonizing to read.
Yeah.
And the film is kind of like that too. I mean, you don't have to be a recovering alcoholic to find the film tough to watch because this man is destroying himself, and he's kind of a hopeless addict, even though the ending has a bit of optimism. I think part of what it misses, I mean, it's sort of unrelentingly grim, has very little humor compared to a typical Wilder film. And I think Milland, he's pretty good, but I think he's a little glib in the role.
I agree. I totally agree.
One thing I think it misses, and I felt this, and then I found a quote from James Agee at the time who said the same thing, and he was an alcoholic. It misses the exhilaration of drinking. It's all grim, depressing, horrifying stuff. And one reason people drink or take drugs or whatever is because there is a kick or a thrill from it. And then, of course, you pay the price that there's a kind of a downturn or backlash in your body against it. And but it misses that kind of exhilaration.
We agree. I mean, of course, the film is highly recommended. But for both of us, I think there's just something that isn't quite there. It's aided tremendously by one of my idols, Miklos Rozsa, whose score is staggeringly effective. Maybe for some intrusive, but not as far as I'm concerned.
Well, he used the theremin, which was unusual. It became a cliche later in science fiction films, but it has an eerie feeling. It's kind of a horror film in a sense, or
well,
dramatic.
I can tell you a story about that because previously, Miklos Rozsa had scored Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound, which I believe was the film that introduced the theremin, and the film was made for Selznick and Hitchcock, and when they saw The Lost Weekend, they were livid, and they called Miklos Rozsa and said, "Rozsa, how dare you use the theremin, which was the key instrument in our film for your Lost Weekend?" And Miklos Rozsa said, "Well, sirs, I also use the piano, the oboe."
I mean, how can you copyright a musical instrument?
Right, absolutely.
And all the composers in Hollywood kind of imitated themselves. Bernard Herrmann, as great as he would borrow from himself in various forms.
Sure. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Joseph McBRIDE.
We pause now for station identification.
DVD Classics Corner on the Air is exclusively produced and released by Dick Dinman's Double D Productions, Inc. All rights reserved. And we're back with Joseph McBRIDE. A film that I find especially interesting, and it was profitable, is a film called Emperor Waltz, which is available on Blu-ray, again from Kino Lorber. And this is a gorgeous Technicolor, very expensive musical bonbon, for want of another word, with Bing Crosby and Joan Fontaine totally and completely lacking chemistry. Also, it's very strange that Wilder would attempt this movie, which I found out through your book is one of the 7 movies he wishes he hadn't done.
Well, yeah, and one of the odd things, and I was alerted to this by a writer named Nancy Stephen Fleur, who wrote a brilliant essay on Wilder a few years ago, and she thought that this film is a disguised metaphor for the Holocaust, which seems very unusual. She said to make the Holocaust background for a Bing Crosby musical is very bizarre.
The thing that I feel doesn't work, nothing really works, except it's a gorgeous-looking film. But this is the first time when Wilder worked, I believe, with an actor he should not have worked with. I don't think Billy Wilder, who is so exact, or was so exacting, in not allowing any actors to change any dialogue at all, would be comfortable working with Bing Crosby, who was brilliant in improvisation and uses improv in a great number of his films. In fact, Bing Crosby, on a few occasions, has been quoted as saying it's a film he did not enjoy. And I think that's very plain, because there is, as I said, zero chemistry between Crosby and Joan Fontaine.
Yeah, they didn't get along, and he has a, I sort of like some of Crosby's performances. And actually, when I did the commentary on that film, I had to watch The Bells of St. Mary's again to remind myself why I like Bing Crosby, because he's wonderful in that film.
Wonderful.
And what he did that really irritated Wilder was he brought his own writers onto the set and had them rewrite the dialogue. Can you imagine Billy Wilder having to put him? But Bing Crosby was the biggest star in America at the time, not only in movies but on radio and recordings.
Yes.
And he had more power than Wilder, and Wilder could have been fired if he had objected to that. So, as you say, Wilder was very exacting about dialogue all through his career, because he and his writing partners, Charles Brackett and later I.L. Diamond, felt actors could not improve on lines that they spent months writing in the office.
Right.
And they were perfectionists. And Crosby is, kind of very self-centered in the film and very glib and off-putting, really, because that contributes to the lack of romance. If he's sort of in love with himself. Joan Fontaine is lovely and beautiful in the film, and I like her as an actress. But it's photographed by George Barnes, who was a great photographer. He was known as perhaps the leading glamour photographer of women, and she certainly looks beautiful in that
is
film.
a gorgeous-looking film, filmed on location in, I think, in British Columbia. Some of it was.
Yeah.
And it's a gorgeous film. Crosby sings beautifully, but it's quite clear he is not happy. There's a certain iciness and calculation behind what he does in this film, which I don't see in many Crosby films. I would like to briefly touch on Billy Wilder's next film, which is also available from Kino Lorber Home Entertainment, A Foreign Affair, which is a film I mostly like, and I think Marlene Dietrich is marvelous in it. I think a name that maybe many of my listeners will not know, John Lund, is exceptionally underrated as an actor. I think he's fine, though, again, I would have preferred William Holden in the role, but I have no problems with him. But I do have a problem with Jean Arthur, who just irritates the heck out of me.
Well, she's my favorite actress, and I actually got to know her late in her life through Frank Capra introduced me. And I and Roddy McDowell were the only people who got to see her, aside from her two female friends. She lived in Carmel, and I would go visit her occasionally. And I think she's wonderful in that film, and she's very brave in playing a very repressed, reactionary congresswoman who's aghast at the immorality of GIs who are occupying Berlin. It's a very daring film.
It is.
Who else would make a romantic comedy set in the ruins of post-war Berlin? It's an amazing combination.
You know who I think
brilliant film.
You know who I think steals the film? Someone we haven't mentioned, Millard Mitchell.
Oh, he's superb in the film.
Isn't
he plays a very sophisticated, worldly commanding officer. It's a very worldly, cosmopolitan film. And Wilder, one of his virtues, like Lubitsch, he was kind of an interpreter of European values to American audiences. And Jean Arthur, I think, is great. She's sort of like Sarah Palin, if you can imagine. Sarah Palin goes to post-war Berlin, very uptight. But it's a very touching performance because she's loosened. Like a lot of Wilder characters start off as repressed or uptight, and they loosen up under the influence of more worldly European characters, and that's what happens. And John Lund is wonderful as this kind of corrupt GI, Army intelligence officer who's stringing her along. And Dietrich is great, and the songs, Frederick Hollander's songs are fantastic.
Marvelous.
It's a very sophisticated and dark political satire, and very brilliant all the way through, I think.
We obviously could not recommend this film more highly. The film we're going to talk about is Sunset Boulevard. And what I'm going to do is point to page 341 in your marvelous book, when you went up to Nancy Olson, who played Betty Schaefer in Sunset Boulevard, and mentioned to her that you've dated a few girls similar to Betty Schaefer. And her remark back to you was, "I'm very sorry to hear that." And you were puzzled by that remark, and I have the answer, because prior to, or maybe after I did my show with Nancy Olson, we got to chatting a lot, especially about Sunset Boulevard. And this is the oddest thing. Nancy Olson doesn't like Betty Schaefer.
Oh, that's interesting.
She thinks Betty Schaefer is an opportunist, and she literally doesn't trust the character.
Yeah, I think she said that on your show, that Betty was an opportunist. I was struck by that. Yeah.
Right. So that is the answer, and of course that makes Sunset Boulevard even darker. But I don't think that was Billy Wilder's intention at all.
Well, ambition can be destructive, and maybe but I think Nancy Olson is such an intelligent actress and person.
Yeah.
That maybe she put that into it as a kind of a way to approach the character. The way actors look at characters, and maybe it's not even in the script.
Paramount, by the way, home video is releasing Sunset Boulevard on Blu-ray. And it's kind of funny that we would approach this aspect of Sunset Boulevard to talk about it, but it's not something people talk about much. So I'm not at all sorry, except to say this is, I think, in many respects, the greatest film that Billy Wilder ever made, except for one that's coming up. But I love this film. I'm passionate about it. I can watch it once a day for the rest of my life.
Right.
Never, ever get tired of it. Gloria Swanson, William Holden, Erich von Stroheim, Fred Clark, the entire cast is unbeatable. It's the photography, I believe, by John Seitz. Am I correct?
Yeah. That's right. He was a silent film cinematographer, very beautiful lighting.
Oh, my God, I love this film. There's just no point in going any further because what are you going to say? It's perfect. It's a perfect film. Well, the next film we're going to discuss is, of course, that great Alan Ladd film, Bases Loaded. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding. The next film will, in fact, be Ace in the Hole, which was the first film that Billy Wilder did after splitting from Charles Brackett. And it's a major financial flop for Paramount, with two titles, Ace in the Hole and The Big Carnival, to try to get the customers in, but it didn't work. I do like this film. I think it's very powerful. The one flaw from me, and I know you're going to disagree with me, is the central casting. I believe that when you have a script this powerful and a character this out there, that you don't hire an actor like Kirk Douglas in this particular instance, who is so intense that the film, to me, feels over the top. Every time I watch Ace in the Hole, do you know who I wish had played Chuck Tatum?
Who?
William Holden.
Oh, that would have been interesting, sure.
That would have been
Well,
very...
you could do that. You could have gone that direction. I mean, I love Kirk Douglas. I wrote a short biography of Kirk Douglas.
Well, I love him too. I love him too. It just
Yeah.
seems to me to be too much.
Douglas has great charisma, and
He does.
he has a certain charm in that role, which you need, because he has to charm all these people into participating in this terrible con game that he plays to keep a man trapped in a cave to build a story, and then the man dies, and it all backfires horribly on him, and he feels guilty. He's a tragic hero in the sense that he does recognize his hubris and
At the very end.
Yeah, at the very end.
Yeah.
And Spike Lee is a big fan of that film, and he became a friend of Billy Wilder as a result. And he thought the ending shot of Kirk Douglas falling into the camera in the newspaper office was one of his favorite ending shots.
Yeah, but there's a similar shot at the end of William Wyler's detective story.
Yeah.
So
yeah, another Douglas film made right around the same time.
Right around the same time. So it's interesting, but I heartily recommend Ace in the Hole. It's a powerful, powerful film, and it's released by the Criterion Collection on Blu-ray, and highly, highly recommended. Very easy to see why it was so unpopular.
Yeah, it's an indictment of the American public.
Right. Right.
For their gullibility and callousness.
Exactly. Now, next we go to Stalag 17. And I don't know whether you'll... by the way, that is available through Warner Home Video. And I don't know whether you'll agree with me, Joe. For me, Stalag 17 is two different films. One is a film about William Holden and his character, and it to me is very strong, with a wonderful Holden, in fact, Oscar-winning Holden performance. I happen to believe he should have won for Sunset Boulevard, but that's just my feeling. You know what bothers me about Stalag 17? The Robert Strauss, Harvey Lembeck slapstick. It doesn't play. As far as I'm concerned, it's too much.
Yeah, Robert Strauss, I think, is horribly hammy and overacting that comic role. In the film, I think you're right that there's too much of that sort of cornball humor that goes on. It's sort of, you can imagine that as
it's too broad.
Broadway play it's based on.
It's too broad.
It's very broad and very, hammy. But Holden underplays, and he's very, very strong. And
yes.
Truffaut, Francois Truffaut, as a young critic, admired that film greatly because he said that it's about an intelligent man who stands out from all these idiots he's surrounded with. And he's a man of integrity, actually, and yet they all hate him and they all shun him. And, one of the things that happened with Wilder after Ace in the Hole flopped was he ran for cover, and he started making films that were kind of pre-sold based on Broadway plays and things for a few years.
Yeah.
And that film has a certain impersonal quality, but it deals with informing. And a lot of Hollywood films during the Blacklist period dealt with betrayal and informing. And it's all about an informer in the midst of this POW camp, and they picked the wrong guy to persecute, and it's about mob rule.
Yeah.
And Truffaut said it's about the dilemma of an intelligent man in the midst of a lot of corrupt and stupid people, and he admired that, and that's why Wilder really he told Cameron Crowe in their interview book that Sefton, the character played by Holden, is the character he most identified with in his work, which is a really interesting comment.
Yeah, indeed. The next film, the next Billy Wilder film, which is available from Paramount Home Video, is Sabrina. Now, I don't know whether you'll agree with me on this, Joe, but I do know, and we all know, that the first actor who Billy Wilder approached to play the male lead in Sabrina was Cary Grant, and Cary Grant turned it down. My feeling is that here we have another brilliant actor who thrives on bits of improvisation whenever possible to keep it alive. I believe, and I believe Grant felt the same way, that he would have not ever have been happy directed by Billy Wilder.
That's an interesting theory about, Wilder said that every film he would have liked Cary Grant, even Ninotchka, which Lubitsch directed from a Wilder bracket, Walter Reich script. They offered that to Grant, and he wouldn't do it, and they got Melvyn Douglas. But Grant just kept turning down one film after another from Wilder. And, Grant never really clarified it. He did make some comment about Wilder being a kind of a tough director for actors to work with. Maybe that's what your point is well taken.
I'm sure.
I do think, though, that the film terribly suffers from miscasting of Humphrey Bogart as a romantic lead, as a much older man looking kind of worn down.
The actor who I feel is miscast in Sabrina is William Holden. For me, this was too light a role for him, and here we go with the blonde peroxide again. Wilder dyes his hair blonde, which tells me Wilder wasn't totally sure about Holden in the role. I would have cast either Gig Young or Peter Lawford.
Well, it is strange to see Holden play that kind of goofball playboy character, but he's such a good actor. He has range and versatility, and I like him in that part. But you could almost maybe imagine him playing the lead role, although he was pretty young at the time. Oh, he wasn't all that young, was he?
Well, he was, but he looked much older due to, I believe, his alcoholism.
Well, he'd been kicking around Hollywood for a long time before he got his big break with Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
But in the play, the character is closer in age to the woman, and that makes the romance more palatable. But when you have Audrey Hepburn with the old Humphrey Bogart, it just seems incongruous and kind of depressing. And I think hurts the film. I find it hard to believe that she would prefer him to William Holden. Although Holden is made to appear to be a frivolous playboy, and she has the sense to go with somebody who's more solid, and that's what the play.
But I will say Audrey Hepburn in this is simply to die for. I've been searching in my life for someone like her all my life and never even have come close.
Well, there's nobody like her, you can search forever.
Right. And now for me, Billy Wilder goes on, for me, which is a 3-film fallow period. The first being 7-Year Itch, made and released on Blu-ray by 20th Century Fox. For me, I'll have to say I do not like this film.
I agree with you. When I wrote my Billy Wilder Dancing on the Edge, watching it again, I thought, wow, this is really not a good film. It's really strident and unfunny.
Yeah.
And, it violates a rule. I teach screenwriting every year, basic screenwriting, and it violates Screenwriting 101 rules because it has Tom Ewell actually talking to himself all the way through the film, explaining everything about his motivations and what he's going to do next, and kind of talking to the audience, and that's ridiculous. Screenwriting, I don't know why they did that. Wilder and George Axelrod, who wrote the play, wrote the film. But it does have the wonderful interludes with Marilyn Monroe, who is luminous, and
true.
I mean, she's portrayed as a fantasy character. She is almost really literally Marilyn Monroe living upstairs from this poor schlub, and he's obsessed with her. But Wilder was hampered by censorship because he wanted to imply that Tom Ewell's character has a brief affair with her, and they wouldn't let him do that. So it becomes a film about blue balls, basically. And it's terribly frustrating. This guy is torn between trying to be faithful to his wife and being attracted to Marilyn Monroe when his wife is away, and it's all about sexual frustration, which makes it kind of painful and unfunny to watch it.
I don't dislike the next film, but which is Spirit of St. Louis, the story of Charles Lindbergh's flight. But you talk about miscasting. What genius got the idea to cast Billy Wilder as the director of this? Only one individual for me should have directed this film, and that's William Wellman.
Interesting. Yeah, it would have been more appropriate. Well, it's the most incongruous film in Wilder's canon, and it's also the first Billy Wilder film I saw, and the first film I ever saw twice in a theater. I liked it so much as a kid. It is a good recreation of the flight, and but you wonder why he made it, and also the fact that he's a Jewish filmmaker who makes a film about a pro-Nazi sympathizer, Charles Lindbergh, and Wilder was aware of all that, but he didn't care because he was so enamored of the story of Lindbergh's flight.
And Jimmy Stewart is much too old for the role.
Yeah.
And Joe, here we go again with the blonde wig.
Yeah, well, the thing is, everybody knew that Stewart was too old, but he was a real flyer in World War II, and he fits the role in a lot of ways. And they offered it first to John Kerr, who had done Tea and Sympathy, and he turned it down because he didn't like Lindbergh's politics, which showed a lot of integrity.
I did not know that, but I can't.
You know who wanted that part? You know who lobbied for the part? Clint Eastwood tried to get that part.
Oh.
He came on the set of 7-Year Itch, and I found a letter he wrote to Wilder saying, I really would like to play Charles Lindbergh.
I did not know that. That's wonderful.
That would have been interesting. But it's a very choppy film because they unfortunately introduce flashbacks which kind of interrupt the narrative.
And it was heavily cut and heavily influenced negatively, to my mind, by Charles Lindbergh himself.
They sanitized everything.
Exactly. Joe, we have come to, we're out of running time. We've come to the end of this particular show, and I do want to ask you whether you will join me on the next show so we can cover the rest of Billy Wilder's fantastic films. Will you join me?
Oh, I'd love to, Dick. Thank you. This has been fun, and we have a lot of great films to talk about.
Oh, we sure do. Well, that's my show for today. DVD Classics Corner on the Air is conceived, written, produced, and directed by me, Double D. And if you'd like to hear some of my older vintage shows, please go to www.dvdclassicscorner.net, where in addition to the broadcasts, you'll find hundreds of my print reviews of classic DVD releases. So, until next week,
keep well, keep happy, and keep listening.